Hi guys, welcome. Today we're doing tourism dynamics and we're still focusing on the planning and policy making. Now, if we look at the WTTC's mission, then their mission today are for policies for growth, and the WTTC stands for the World Travel and Tourism Council. Now, let's look at some, the kind of the development of this, the historical development of this. Between 1945 and 2000, we can see 1945 to 1955, there was a streamlining of policies and customs, currently health regulations put in place after World War II. Between 1955 and 1975, the government now starts to make more involvement in marketing in order to increase earning potential in terms of tourism policies, but again very loose. Between 1975 and 1985, the government involvement in the supply of tourism infrastructure and tourism as a tool for regional development. So now we can see some governmental policies and planning and legislation and a push with some investment into the supply of tourism infrastructure to get the redevelopment and enhance redevelopment of various regions. Between 1985 and 2000, there was a period of reduced government involvement in the supply of infrastructure. So this was kind of like a reversal of the 1997 to 1985. Again, there was more focus of environmental issues. There was an emphasis on private-public partnerships, which was good. There was industry self-regulation, so not really government regulation, but industry self-regulation. And there was alternative tourism and new approaches to tourism. As regards to after 2000, we can see international tourism policies after 2000. And, now we're seeing tourism seen as a tool for regional development. And there was a greater focus on the network development and collaboration with different partners between the private and public sector and clustering. Other issues that were needed to be thought about was security in terms of terrorism and crisis in terms of natural disasters and what policies and procedures were put in place in terms of certain countries in terms of natural disasters and the management of new dimensions of tourism policy. And then, more environmental issues in terms of climate change were prominent, along with broader issues of global environmental change. And then in developing countries, the pro-poor tourism initiatives initiated by the non-government organizations, the NGOs, as a significant policy issue. And then, and in addition to that, reduction in trade barriers. But the other thing that we need to bear in mind are the World Trade Organization in terms of the summits in 1972, in Stockholm, and also the summits in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, which we'll touch on more later today. Now, when we think about the planning and policy systems, we can look at the black box of planning and policy systems, where we kind of have demands, and then this kind of leads into tourism policy and planning processes. And things that need to be considered are the institutional arrangements, values, power, interests, networks, and significant individuals, which then kind of like lead into outputs into decisions and policies, getting feedback and coming all the way back round. If we try and apply this system to, let's say, Canterbury, and we say there's an increase of 10-15% of tourists into the city of Canterbury, and then we are saying to ourselves, well, how do we manage this? And what's going to be the impact upon tourism? What's going to be the impact upon the social and the environmental aspects of the city? If we look at pollution levels and the environmental side would increase, we can see that yes, on one hand, Canterbury actually wants more development, wants more people to come into Canterbury because it's good for business, it's good for the economic region of Canterbury itself. But on the other hand, you've got more pollution, you've got more cars coming in, you've got more congestion. It's going to affect locals, it's going to affect the people who live there, it's going to affect the environment. So if we take one instance in terms of local government working with independent private bus companies and then giving regulations for bus companies to set up their travel and business outside of Canterbury, taking people, transporting people inside of Canterbury and out, and then the council obviously subsidising and investing in and allowing planning permission for these private bus companies to actually set this up outside Canterbury, and the building regulations and the car parks and the payment systems to allow more tourists to come in, therefore restricting the environmental pollution and the impact, negative impact on the people living there in terms of the number of cars coming into the city itself, and then changing the legal regulations in terms of car parking and the amount of car parking payments that are required. So again, it's local councils working with private people, trying to kind of with their values and looking at the different interests of people from a sociological perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a the people perspective who are living there, and it's taking all these significant individuals into consideration. Even if we look at the picture here in terms of Vancouver, we can see that if we try to apply this black box of planning and policy systems, how did it actually get to this stage? So again, this is very important to consider the black box of planning and policy systems. Now, when we think about tourism policy and planning, it really depends upon the view that the government, local government has in terms of tourism planning. And there are different approaches, including the boom steering approach, the economic industry orientated approach, the physical spatial approach, the community orientated approach, or the sustainable tourism orientated approach. When we think about the boost steering approach, this really has a dominance towards tourism development. Simplistic attitude that tourism development is inherently good and benefits the hosts, definitely from an economic side. Little consideration to the potential negative economic, social, and environmental impacts of tourism. Cultural and natural resources are regarded as objects to be exploited for the sake of tourism development. Residents are not involved in the decision making and planning, and still used by politicians for economic growth, always to be promoted. So again, if we think about sustainability, it's not really taking into consideration the economic or the social side in terms of the three pillars of sustainability, but it's more focused on just the economic development of tourism. The economic traditional approach, well, here we're saying tourism is seen as an industry. The government used tourism to promote growth and development in specific areas. Marketing promotion is used to attract different types of visitors, and the economic goals have a more priority over the ecological and social goals. Limited attention to impacts of tourism, satisfaction of visitors, positive attitudes towards tourists and host communities are not answered. So again, yeah, there is some degree of thought in terms of ecological and social, but there's still, again, the economic traditional approach is still focused on the economic side of tourism. If we think about the physical spatial approach, here the development is defined in environmental terms, ecological basis for development, concentration of dispersal of visitors, visitor management, physical carrying capacity, and limited attention given to social and cultural attributes of the destination. So again, more readily defined from an environmental perspective and moving in the direction now of the environment as opposed to the other two approaches. The fourth area is the community orientated approach. This engages and involves the local people in terms of looking at their economic livelihoods, looking at their cultural values, and preserving the natural environment, as well as development defined as social cultural terms, looking at the needs for the local and local control, search for balanced development, and a search for alternatives to mass tourism. So it therefore is a bottom-up approach, and this is more in line with the Rio de Janeiro Brundtland Agenda 21 in terms of the economic side, the three pillars of sustainability: the economic side, the social side, and the environmental side. But the Brundtland report didn't look at sustainability in terms of the fourth element now that people are talking about, the fourth element in terms of the ozone layer, and in terms of sustainability, making sure we meet the needs of today's society without disadvantaging the needs of future societies. Again, adhering to really the three and four pillars of the sustainability. So thank you today from Mr. Tan.